trusted voice of truth and light.
God gave me a gift. I shovel well. I shovel very well.
And a rally point for those who've accepted the reality that they are not sheep.
We've got a blind date with destiny.
And it looks like she's ordered the lobster.
This is the Bryan Hyde Show.
Well, hello there, and welcome to the show. I hope you're having a great day, and I hope by the time you have listened to some of the content that I have to share with you today, that your day is going even better. Now, I may be hoping in vain because, frankly, I glanced over the headlines a little bit, and there's a lot of crazy stuff going on. So let me get some hard truths out of the way here first before we jump in. Looks like another pandemic, or so the media is telling us. A pandemic is beginning to unfold. Monkeypox is the latest word that seems to be on a lot of people's minds, or words, I should say, that are on people's minds. Economic difficulty. In fact, you have to kind of wonder if maybe the monkeypox isn't something to distract from the economic realities that are, shall we say, less than pleasant. But we're going to talk about those a little bit later on in the show. First thing I want to do, I want to thank the sponsors who make this possible on a daily basis. They include the Heather Turner team at Patriot Home Mortgage, lifesavingfood.com, monticellocollege.org, sewingandquiltingcenter.com, hslammo.com, and Dixie Chiropractic, which you can reach at dixiechiro.com. So I'm going to start with something that, normally, you want to charge right in with the whole idea, if it bleeds, it leads, right? Get people captured with the stuff that really gets their passion going, their heart thumping, and, they can hear their pulse in their ears. But I want to take a step back today. And the first thing I'm going to share with you and ask you to consider is an article from a writer with whom I have disagreed probably 90% of the time. And I don't want to make it sound like, because he's so dumb that I'm so much smarter. David French, I actually had the chance to hear him speak a few years ago at a conference of think tanks. And the guy he's a very, very brilliant man. Oftentimes, the reason I find myself disagreeing with him is because it seems like a lot of his takes seem to favor the status quo, or seem to provide justification or wiggle room for the establishment. And that's not to say that he's an establishment lackey. I'm just saying his perspective, I think, sometimes seems to strengthen or to try to uphold some of the very institutions that I think are doing us dirty. So it's a difference of opinion. I'm not telling you, therefore you have to believe me over him. But I want to share some excerpts from a column that he shared about how a commitment to kindness doesn't mean surrendering your convictions. And maybe this is going to be one of those cases where you're going to say, well, Bryan, I agree with you 90% of the time, and this is one of those times I'm not going to agree. But I would strongly encourage you to read David French's essay. A commitment to kindness does not mean you're surrendering your convictions. Now, he's talking about civility. And he starts with a personal experience about something that was going on more than 20 years ago at, I believe, at Tufts University. And there was an organization on campus, the Tufts Christian Fellowship, which apparently was on trial of sorts. The student judiciary had expelled it from campus in a late-night emergency meeting, and so they went to appeal to that student judiciary to see if they could get this emergency expulsion reversed. And the reason they had been expelled, remember, this is 22 years ago, so the political climate, and particularly the societal climate, was quite a bit different. But the reason that they were trying to expel this group was because it excluded a gay student from leadership because she did not agree with that group's traditional stance on sexual morality. Now, they didn't exclude her from her leadership because she was lesbian. They'd known about her sexual orientation. They actually included her in the group from the very first days of her freshman year. But the reason that she was asked not to be a part of that group's leadership was because she did not share the group's theological views about sex. So to put it very plainly, David French writes, this Tufts Christian Fellowship, or TCF, simply wished to be led by people who shared its values. Now think about that for just a moment. Well, but they were excluding somebody. Well, that's great. But, in the name of inclusion, would you invite an avowed Satanist to come teach Sunday school or primary to your kids? Would you? Probably not, if they don't share your values. That's a fundamental bedrock principle of expressive association. David French asks, should campus regulations require an LGBT group to be open to leaders who, for example, oppose gay marriage? Should you make them do that in the name of inclusion? No, that would be absurd. So he was there as legal counsel, defending the bedrock principle of expressive association, but he was very pessimistic about how this hearing was going to go. Tufts is a private university. The First Amendment does not apply. In other words, it's not a government school. It's not like it's the government trying to censor the Tufts Christian Fellowship. And even worse, the student judiciary was an elected body. Many of the candidates had run on the platform of, we're going to toss these Christian fellows off the campus. So tensions were very high. Apparently some very hateful anti-Christian chalkings had been written on the sidewalks, and they knew they were walking into a protest outside the hearing room doors. But he says, I wasn't prepared for what happened next. TCF had dozens of members, and the group's student leaders asked them to stay at a house off campus and pray rather than walk with them to the hearing. In other words, they didn't bring their own protest with them because they were trying not to exacerbate tensions. So he led a very small band of students, 4 leaders and 1 witness, into the student center and toward the hearing room. Now, when they got there, the protesters had turned out the lights. Some had candles. They filled the halls. It was dark. It was scary. Several walked up menacingly to the TCF student leaders and glared at them from just inches away. So they tried to hurry through the crowd to get into the hearing room, but when they tried to enter, they were told, you have to leave. The student judges aren't ready yet. So they stood there outside the room, huddled in a corner, in the dark, surrounded by a wall of angry protesters. And he says, I tried to act unconcerned, but it was a deeply intimidating moment. One of the young TCF leaders started visibly shaking. When they finally were allowed in the hearing room, the proceedings immediately felt like a kangaroo court. The case against the Tufts Christian Fellowship was full of falsehoods. The judiciary broke its own rules by permitting activists to speak against the group. Only actual witnesses were supposed to testify. And by the time Jonathan, who was one of the TCF student leaders, stood up to speak, he had been through an ordeal. He'd walked to class through anti-Christian chalkings. He'd endured physical intimidation. Now he just heard an avalanche of false claims. How did he respond? David French says, I'll never forget the moment. He turned to the student who brought the claims against the Tufts Christian Fellowship and said, TCF would not say one word against her. He said that the leaders loved her and mourned their lost friendship. They harbored no bitterness against her. Then he turned to the student judiciary and in a quiet but firm voice said that TCF had not violated university policy and that he would defend TCF's place on campus, that if Tufts' commitments to academic freedom and diversity meant anything, they meant including the group committed to the principles of the historic, orthodox Christian faith. Now, they ended up winning the right to stay on that campus. In fact, they actually turned the hearts of many of the people who were there opposing them to supporting them. And the point that he's making here is that sometimes we hear people talk about how, if you are kind or if you are showing any kind of deference to people who are behaving in vile ways or just flat out opposing you, whether they're being civil or not, if you are thinking, well, I'm going to fight fire with fire, they're being uncivil, and frankly, let's face it, some of the most uncivil people that you're likely to encounter are going to be social justice warriors. Is it really best to take a page from their book? We got to fight them with the same tactics that they're using. Now, look, I know plenty of people who agree, yes, you should. It's the only way to do anything. But David French makes the case that just maybe the way to win people over is to show decency. Kindness isn't just a tactic, he says. It's actually a commandment. I don't know if you remember, but somebody once said, love your enemies, pray for those that spitefully use you. And he says, I'm not telling you this story to make the case that kindness always works. Sometimes it doesn't work, and it certainly didn't win over all of TCF's opponents. But he says, it would have been imperative to treat our opponents with respect and decency, even if we had lost. And he says, I tell this story to demonstrate that civility and decency aren't incompatible with taking sides. In other words, it doesn't require anyone to fold in the face of angry opposition. Kindness doesn't conflict with conviction, and our commitments to kindness are biblically inseparable from our commitments to justice. We aren't to choose between them. We're supposed to embrace them both. And that's the conundrum I'm putting in front of you today. Do you know where you stand? Do you understand your principles clearly enough? Have you paid the price to know what they are, that you could even treat a person with kindness who is trying to tear down your principles, trying to tear you down? I submit that it's the people who are very unsure of themselves that tend to get angry and violent. Let's strive not to be that person. Let's know who we are, let's know what we stand for, and use kindness.
This is the Bryan Hyde Show. This is the Bryan Hyde Show.
Welcome back to the show. A quick shout out here to the Heather Turner team at Patriot Home Mortgage, located in St. George, Utah. Heather has been in the mortgage industry for a long time, decades. What that means is she has experience in understanding what lenders need. She understands what the borrowers need. She knows the ins and outs of the process. And she works for a company that has the clout to get you the loan you need without delay. So if you are hearing this message and you're looking for a home, or you're looking for a mortgage or a VA loan, a traditional loan, a reverse mortgage, whatever the case may be, anywhere within the state of Utah or the state of Idaho, contact the Heather Turner team at Patriot Home Mortgage. You can call her at 435-703-4522. In my sponsor links in my daily show notes, you'll see a link for Heather. That's an email link. Click it and you can email her directly. Heather's NMLS ID is 715386, and Patriot Home Mortgage is an equal housing opportunity lender. So in the vein of fighting fire with fire, I want to take this one step further, and I'm going to use a little more relevant example. I don't know how many people are feeling religiously persecuted right now, but I know of a number of people who felt persecuted because they have not taken the vaccine. And I've got a great article. This is from back in April from Susan Dunham on her Medium account. What we learned from hating the unvaccinated. And I believe she's writing from Canada. She says, the battlefield is still warm following Canada's war on the unvaccinated. The mandates have let up. Both sides stumble back into something that looks like the old normal, except that there's a fresh and present injury done to the people we tried to break. And no one wants to talk about it. Only weeks ago, it was the admitted goal of our own leaders to make life unlivable for the unvaccinated. And as a deputized collective, we force multiplied that pain, taking the fight into our families, friendships, and workplaces. But she says today, we face the hard truth that none of it was justified, and in doing that, uncover a precious lesson. Susan Dunham says it was a quick slide from righteousness to cruelty. And however much we might blame our leaders for the push, we're accountable for stepping into the trap despite better judgment. We knew that waning immunity put vast numbers of the fully vaccinated on par with the shrinking minority of the unvaccinated. Yet we marked them for special persecution. We said they hadn't done the right thing by turning their bodies over to state care, even though we knew that principled opposition to such a thing is priceless in any circumstance. And we truly let ourselves believe that going into another ineffectual lockdown would be their fault, not the fault of toxic policy. And so it was by the willful ignorance of science, civics, and politics that we squeezed the unvaccinated to the degree that we did. She says we invented a new rubric for the good citizen, and failing to be one ourselves, took pleasure in scapegoating anyone who didn't measure up. After months of engineered lockdowns, having someone to blame and to burn simply felt good. So we cannot hold our heads high, as if believing we had logic, love, or truth on our side, while we viciously wish death upon the unvaccinated. The best we can do is sit in the awareness of our rabid inhumanity for having cast so many aside. Now, she says many of us who pilloried the non-compliant did it because it seemed like certain victory, like the unvaccinated would never make it through unbroken. Indeed, the promised new normal looked unbeatable, so we sided with it and made punching bags out of the holdouts. But she says betting against them has been a scathing embarrassment for many of us who've now learned that the mandates only had the power we gave them. It was not through quiet compliance that we avoided endless domination by pharmaceutical companies and medical checkpoints at every doorway. It was thanks to the people we tried to tear down. So Susan Dunham says, for those of us not among the hopeless few that pray for the return of mandates, we might find some inner gratitude for the unvaccinated. We took the bait by hating them, but their perseverance bought us the time to see that we were wrong. It seems like right now the mandates will return, she says, but this time there's hope that more of us will see them for what they are, a rising authoritarianism that has no concern for our well-being. If there's an enemy, it's the confidence game of state power and the transparent attempt to tear us apart. Heeding that looks like our best shot at redemption. I mean, that's a pretty big admission. And it brings up the situation that I know many of us have faced, especially if you're one of those holdouts. You know, if you're one of the people who successfully navigated the waters, you didn't take the jab. Some people, even at the cost of their job, sometimes it cost you friendships. Sometimes family members turned their backs on you. But if you held firm and didn't give in, you know what it's like to see people around you finally start to catch on and go, hey, maybe we weren't right in, all the opprobrium we heaped on everybody who didn't go along with the program. And I know it's tempting to think, well, now it's time for some vengeance, right? It's payback, baby. But I'm going to ask you, consider avoiding that temptation to lash out or to exact that revenge on them. You don't need your pound of flesh. The fact that someone has actually come to the realization that, you know what, I was wrong. And maybe some of them actually feel something, of contrition about what they were doing or what they were advocating. The only place I really don't see any contrition is typically on the part of the people who are in power making those decisions. And even there, I'm trying to be magnanimous enough to give them the benefit of the doubt and say, okay, they're probably afraid. And I mean really afraid, like they're going to be sitting in some Nuremberg-type dock answering for what they've done. They should be scared. The harm they did was real. And I know it's frustrating, and it frustrates me to see them still cling to, well, but, we'll never know if it was the right thing or not. That's Dr. Fauci. We can never know if the lockdowns worked or not. We know. We know very well. And the unrepentant ones are just, this side of insufferable sometimes, especially Dr. Fauci. But the average person who is finally making the connection and saying, that was really unnecessary, or I regret that I went along with it. Some of them are feeling regret that they went ahead and got the jab. Some of them are feeling regret that they piled on and, did what they could to ostracize people, whether it be the maskless or the unjabbed. I know this is hard, but we need these people on our side. And it's not abasing yourself to show them some mercy. This is one of those places where I'm going to invoke the golden rule. And I fully understand there are people who strongly disagree with me. You're probably yelling at the speaker right now going, hey, you're out of line here, Hyde. Get back in your lane. But I'm urging you, take the high road. There is no need to gloat. There is no need to lord it over people. There's no need to rub their noses in it like they're a naughty puppy who piddled on the floor. Every one of us has had to fight this battle to figure out, okay, what is right and what is wrong. And even though I speak like I have all this certainty, and I'm happy to say, yes, I remain unjabbed. And I'm defiant. My line in the sand turned into a trench a long time ago because of the pressure that was brought to bear. But that does not give me any kind of moral authority to treat somebody in a way that I wouldn't want to be treated myself. So for those times when I am wrong or when I have been wrong and I have seen the light and went, ooh, I got to make an adjustment here. I am forever grateful to those people who knew all along that I was wrong and still showed enough love and acceptance to welcome me into their ranks as I encountered new truth and assimilated it into my life. We've got to be that kind of people. Yeah, I know it's hard. And my instincts run towards, vengeance rather than, reconciliation. It's a test, and it may be one of the harder tests. I'm convinced, however, that it is the right thing to do. Everybody's somewhere on that journey of trying to get out of the swamp of misinformation and find their way to firmer ground and brighter sunlight. Let's help them make that journey, because I guarantee someone has been helping you and leaving trail markers along the way so that you could find your way. Let's be kind enough to do that for the people who are following behind us.
This is the Bryan Hyde Show. This is the Bryan Hyde Show.
Hey, welcome back to the show. A quick shout out here to hslammo.com. If you are into the shooting sports, first of all, I tip my hat to you. It's a great thing. One of the funnest things that I can do with my kids. In fact, my kids beg me, take us to the range, take us to the range. They just love to get out there and make a joyous noise for freedom, to learn skill at arms. And I know there are people who think, well, that's a terrible thing, teaching kids to shoot guns. But I promise you, as you teach them their responsibilities and the fun that goes along with the shooting sports, they're not the kind of kids who are going to turn into some mass shooter, because they understand the responsibility that comes along with the use of firearms. I've seen Spencer Worthington, the founder of HSL Ammo, teach the people around him time and time again, reach out to new shooters and just make their experience at the range a great thing. And of course, to have a great experience at the range, you're going to need some great ammo. HSL Ammo is the source I would point you towards. I try not to spread gossip or to be the equivalent of the Hollywood tattler, but I'm going to be talking a little bit about some personalities in this part of the show. In particular, Elon Musk is stepping up in a big way to get a hardcore legal team put together to push back against those trying desperately to put a gag on him. Now, maybe you heard this over the weekend, or I guess it was the end of last week. A long time ago, it was more than a year ago, Musk made a comment about, hey, when the inevitable scandal arises involving me, just remember, I was the one who recommended we use the term elongate. Huh? Get it? Elongate, right? And okay, it's very clever, but sure enough, like clockwork, here it came. Allegations that Musk paid someone $250,000 after, approaching them or soliciting them for sex, and then, I don't know, that was the hush money, or so it's alleged. Yeah, he's making a lot of people on the left very, very nervous right now. His move to buy Twitter, his thoughts on free speech, and I've watched his tweets now for some time. I followed him on Twitter and thought, this guy's been red-pilled. There are things that he is starting to say with boldness and with a sense of conviction. And it's very refreshing because he's got a pretty large platform right now. Whether this Twitter deal is fully gone through or not, Musk has some he's got some clout. And it's really upsetting some folks. Andrea Widburg has a great article about how he is going on the offensive with a hardcore legal department. She says, Elon Musk is proving to be an exceptionally interesting person. He's been a Democrat throughout his years in America, and he still believes in anthropogenic climate change. He's an extraordinary inventor who thinks bigger than most anybody in the world, and, like Donald Trump, who probably would have continued as a moderate if the left hadn't gone scorched earth on him, Musk is responding to leftist attacks on him since he announced his plan to buy Twitter, not by meekly retreating, but by announcing that he intends to fight them all the way. So last week, within a day of Musk tweeting that he intends to vote Republican in the next election, Business Insider published an article in which a woman's friend claims that the woman told her that Musk propositioned the woman, grabbed her butt, and exposed himself to her. The proof is that Musk paid the woman $250,000 to go away. Some proof. Now, to someone as wealthy as Musk, $250,000 is chump change and well worth the price to get rid of a nuisance lawsuit that would require him to appear for a deposition and respond to other pretrial discovery and then go to court, creating the risk of having a judge or jury decide to punish him for being rich and famous. Musk knew this was coming, as he tweeted out, "Political attacks on me will escalate dramatically in the coming months." He also castigated the entire Democratic Party. This is his tweet from May 18th of this year. "In the past, I voted Democrat because they were mostly the kindness party. But they've become the party of division and hate, so I can no longer support them and will vote Republican." Judging by the relentless hate stream from the far left, he says this tweet was spot on. He also was able to put the attacks in perspective. He says, "The attacks against me should be viewed through a political lens. This is their standard, despicable playbook," but he says, "nothing will deter me from fighting for a good future and your right to free speech." And he also had a good laugh about them. This is where he says, "Finally, we get to use Elongate as a scandal name. It's kind of perfect." But Andrea Widburg says all is not trenchant or accurate tweets. Musk is out for blood. He says so straight out. This is a tweet from May 20th. "Tesla is building a hardcore litigation department where we directly initiate and execute lawsuits. The team will report directly to me. Please send 3 to 5 bullet points describing evidence of exceptional ability." And then he tweeted, "My commitment, we will never seek victory in a just case against us, even if we will probably win. We will never surrender or settle an unjust case against us, even if we will probably lose." And when he was looking for these hardcore street fighter attorneys, he says, "I'm looking for hardcore street fighters, not white shoe lawyers like Perkins or Cooley who thrive on corruption. There will be blood." And he asks people, please include links to cases you've tried. Now, Andrea Widburg says, in addition to giving everyone fair warning that if they push, he will push back much harder, perfect game theory, Musk is also using his enormous platform to broadcast the Democrats' political sins and again to say that he's planning to fight. So there was a tweet from Representative Jim Jordan. This is about some of the revelations that came out last week about Russiagate. Christopher Steele created the dossier. Glenn Simpson sold it to the press. Michael Sussman took it to the FBI. And Democrats and the media lied to you about it all. Elon Musk replied to that tweet saying, "All true. Bet most people still don't know that a Clinton campaign lawyer using campaign funds created an elaborate hoax about Trump and Russia. Makes you wonder what else is fake." Someone else had responded, "Elon's out for blood now. Love to see it." And Musk himself responded to that tweet saying, "I am indeed out for blood." Makes you wonder what else is fake. Now, that doesn't exactly sound like an abstract rumination. It sounds like it talks in, warning leftists that he has a good idea exactly what's fake, and whether he purchases Twitter or not, he'll make sure everybody knows. Sundance at the conservative treehouse is darn pleased about these developments. In fact, he's especially pleased about that Hillary tweet because he thinks it may take someone like Musk to break through the stranglehold leftist institutions have on the brains and knowledge base of non-political Americans. Sundance says, quote, "We must remember the vast majority of people in the U.S. have no idea the scale of corruption that took place within the Trump, Russia, and Spygate operations. This trial is becoming a vending machine for red pill distribution. Also, keep in mind that where you were a few years ago. Imagine, as an example, all of these newly awakened people finally discovering and accepting the FBI are the bad guys. He says it likely took many conservative treehouse readers multiple years and dozens of examples before that acceptance was grounded." He says these are bitter pill acceptances, but eventually do lead to major changes in the social fabric and cohesion of a nation. But it's a painful journey. Final thoughts? He says, do not dismiss the importance of what Elon Musk is doing. In addition to introducing millions of Americans to something they are newly experiencing, this shift in cultural opinion is akin to Musk playing the role of John Galt and swinging the social control pendulum away from the government. End quote. I mean, when I read that, I kind of feel encouraged. Andrea Widburg says, remember, sometimes things must get worse before they can get better, and that in fortunate nations, the right person appears at the right time, whether that's Joan of Arc, Winston Churchill, Donald Trump, or maybe Elon Musk. Now, if it sounds like, gee, Bri, you're becoming kind of a fanboy of Musk. Well, to the extent that I see him pushing back against the authoritarian left, yes. And to the extent I see him pushing back against their enablers on the right, the authoritarian right, yeah, I'm definitely very approving of what he's doing. And to me, there's also that possibility. It makes me want to dust off and see what Jim Quinn over at the Burning Platform is saying. Quinn has become one of my favorite observers on fourth turning methodology. And one of the things that you see during a fourth turning crisis is the great champion stepping up. Now, just a couple of weeks ago, I shared with you an article that wondered, is Putin possibly one of those great champions? Is Xi Jinping one of those champions? When I look at some of the stuff that Musk is doing, I wonder if perhaps Elon Musk is a great champion. See, the amazing thing is great champions don't always have to be a cowboy in a white hat wearing, astride a noble white steed and, riding in to save the day. But they're people with leadership ability to make the hard decisions during times of crisis and to generate enough confidence in the people around them that people are willing to follow their lead. As you can guess, that can be a good thing or it can be a bad thing. FDR was a very clear example of a great champion. Abraham Lincoln was a clear example of a great champion. And I'm not using either one of them as examples of, and they were the best of their kind. I think both of them did some pretty amazing harm. But the point is, we are in a state of crisis. And I think Musk's leadership is actually coming at a very opportune time. So I wish him success in what he's doing. We'll be back in just a few moments.
This is the Bryan Hyde Show. This is the Bryan Hyde Show.
Hey, welcome back to the show. Let's give a quick shout out here to Dixie Chiropractic. That is Dr. Ward Wagner. I'd like you to check out their website. I've got a link actually at my show notes at thebryanhydeshow.com, dixiechiro.com, if you want to just pop that into your browser. Specifically, Dr. Wagner has asked me to reach out to 3 different groups of people. Anyone who has suffered car accident injuries, talk to the folks at his office and learn how you can receive chiropractic care with no out-of-pocket costs. If you have bulging or herniated discs, first of all, my condolences. That's been dealing with that myself, and that is not much fun. Here's a $99 intro special, which consists of 2 treatments plus massage. Or if you know someone who is dealing with neuropathy, here's the $99 CalMare treatment plus massage. Go to dixiechiro.com to get all the details. I'm going to take a little bit longer to talk about Elon Musk. And note that watching him get red-pilled in real time has been an eye-opener for a lot of other people who are also seeking higher ground. Got a great article here from Roger Kimball. This is from AmericanGreatness.com. Signs and Portents. Elon Musk's growing political maturity. He says a few weeks ago, Exxon announced that it was banning the display of Pride and BLM flags at its headquarters in Houston. Now, there was a ripple of unhappiness, but nothing was burned down. The media attention was muted, and the world went about its business as before. Across the country, school board elections are tossing out woke ideologues and partisans of critical race theory and replacing what amounts to gay pornography in the curriculum with more wholesome fare. The Biden administration keeps running into roadblocks, most recently a judicial order halting its efforts to rescind Title 42, a Trump-era emergency order that turned away would-be immigrants at the U.S.-Mexico border. A few days ago, Biden's absurd Disinformation Governance Board was shuttered, and its pathetic director, Nina Jankowicz, sucked back into the memory hole whence she came. And then on Friday, Hillary Clinton's campaign manager, Robbie Mook, testified, what do you know, that his boss knew all about and, in fact, approved the spurious efforts to frame Donald Trump as a Russian asset, contrary to what she and her handlers have said ever since before Hunter Biden took his laptop to be repaired. And then there is Elon Musk. Now, Roger Kimball says, I've long been a fan of this rocket man, notwithstanding his mantras about sustainable transport and other sops from the green agenda. Hitherto, he says, my enthusiasm was for his technological prowess, his hard work, and his amazing products. But he says, now I find myself applauding his political savvy and efforts on behalf of free speech. Princeton University and other one-party bastions of conformity and self-congratulation should ponder Musk's central observation about free speech. Quote, when it's someone you don't like saying something you don't like, that's when it actually matters. End quote. Kimball says the world was stunned last month when Musk took a 9.2% share in Twitter and then announced that he intended to buy the company outright. The anguished skirling of the Twitterati, alarmed that a platform advertised as promoting free expression might be forced to live up to its mission statement, was music to the ears of the unwoke, who could hear the clock ticking on this enemy of consecutive thought and political maturity. Now, he says we haven't heard the last of them. Just as Musk predicted, his promise to restore free speech to Twitter, even, dear God in heaven, to the extent of welcoming back Donald Trump to the platform, sent them right around the bend. And Musk compounded his tort by admitting that he did not believe Twitter's declaration that 5% or less of its apparent users were bots or spam. And the hits just keep on coming. Not only is Musk looking into the question of Twitter's candor, he's also likely to decrease his offering price when he figures out just how many users are fake. If, he said in a recent interview, you were contemplating buying a house and the owner told you 5% of its structure had termites, that would be one thing. But if it turned out that 80 or 90% of the structure were infested, that would be something else entirely. How much worse can it get for the entrenched forces of conformity? And the answer is a lot worse. On top of everything else, Musk has just announced that he moved from being a moderate Democrat to being a moderate Republican. Oh man, did you hear that, Mabel? I've just switched from moderate D to moderate R, he tweeted, as I think many independent voters would have done. Salt in the wound time. We know the magnitude of this trend in November. I think it's big. These are Musk's words. Roger Kimball says, me too. Or perhaps I should say, hashtag me too. Musk predicted attacks against him would escalate once he changed his changed political feelings were made public. Back on May 18th, he wrote, in the past, I voted Democrat because they were mostly the kindness party, but now they've become the party of division and hate, so I can no longer support them and will vote Republican. Now watch their dirty tricks campaign against me unfold, end quote. Roger Kimball says, I like that this was followed by a popcorn emoji. And indeed, the dirty tricks are flowing in from all sides, the latest being an allegation by a flight attendant that Musk acted inappropriately back in 2016. The charge will not go anywhere. Musk is robust in fighting false charges, but perhaps it will fulfill one long-standing wish. If there's ever a scandal about me, he tweeted in March 2021, please call it Elongate. Let's do it. The story of Elon Musk's growing political maturity is not a one-off or an individual data point. Roger Kimball says it's part of a process, a gathering sea change. He says what we're seeing is not so much a pendulum swinging back from the extremism of identity politics as the eruption throughout the society of contrary fires. Musk's coming of age is a sign or portent of a larger shift in the sensibility of our time. Now, he does point out this shift won't happen all at once, and there will be holdouts and reversals, but what we are witnessing is a sort of spiritual reveille, an awakening from wokeness. The extent of that awakening will not, as Musk said, be evident until the November election. Indeed, he says, I predict that it won't be fully evident until the 2024 election when, further prediction, Donald Trump wins yet again, this time beyond the margin of fraud and dissimulation. Roger Kimball says, let's see if I'm right. Be an interesting possibility, wouldn't it? And I don't mean to disappoint anybody, but I'm just going to come right out and let you know. I don't know if I could support Donald Trump. It's not that the first time he ran, I did not vote for him. The second time he ran, when he ran for re-election, I did vote for him. I don't think he's the worst thing that ever happened to this country by a long shot, but please hear me out. I don't think Donald Trump is necessarily the answer that we're looking for either. And I know we're stuck with this binary choice. Well, it's going to be him or it's going to be Joe Biden or Joe Biden's puppetry team, whoever it is that's controlling him and his teleprompter. I think depending on how things go this November, and I don't mean to sound pessimistic, but the way things have been trending, the way the polls have been showing support swinging against the Democrats, I think we will see some pretty strong efforts to do everything possible to shut down these midterm elections. Monkeypox comes to mind. Just, it's a terrible epidemic or pandemic, and we've got to shut everything down, lock it down even harder than before. We've got to make sure it's nothing but mail-in ballots. And anyway, if you think there were hijinks in the 2020 election, I think the hijinks are about to begin. There may be other things that will come up. I wouldn't put it past the powers that be to get World War III kicked off with direct and open conflict with nuclear-armed Russia. I'm not saying that I think that a nuclear war is right there on the horizon, but can we at least acknowledge the reality that when you have two nuclear powers, both behaving in belligerent fashion, yes, I'm including the U.S. as one of the belligerents, if not the prime belligerent, what do you think is going to happen? What do you think is likely to happen? Caitlin Johnstone had a comment, and I'm going to have to paraphrase this because I don't have it in front of me, but it was something to the effect of, well, hang on a second. Actually, it's good enough. I'm going to find it and quote it for you just because I want to see if I can get this correct. She talks about how difficult it is to believe that the U.S. is just trying to encircle Russia and China so that it can protect everything peaceful and good in the world. Do you really believe that the leadership of the United States government and its compadres, in other governments, NATO, for instance, do you really think that's what they're trying to do? See, I see a lot of imperial behavior on the part of our own leaders, which to me absolutely undermines any moral authority they might have. So I'm not seeing good guys in this one. And I think it's really naive when people say, well, Mitt Romney, I'm looking at you. Well, if we see the need to confront them with a nuclear capability or initiating some kind of nuclear strike or other, direct conflict with Russia, it's probably going to work out for the best. It just seems like the folks in Washington, D.C., the establishment, particularly its neocon wing, they are chomping at the bit. Maybe it's because they know that war makes people fearful, war makes people fall in line, and that will blunt some of the criticism being directed at them. I'm urging you, don't fall for it, at least not till you've had a chance to think it through.
This is the Bryan Hyde Show.